What's up? It's Markel here, and solving a Rubik's Cube is not that hard. I've literally solved all of these. Solving a Rubik's Cube isn't hard, but it does take some effort. Let me tell you when I learned how to solve the Rubik's Cube. So, when I was in high school, I remember there was a classmate of mine who came into our chemistry class, and he basically was like showing off that he was able to solve the Rubik's Cube. And I was like, oh, okay. And I thought it was pretty neat. I always thought it was an interesting little logic puzzle. And I never knew how to solve it. So I was just like, hey, could I borrow your Rubik's Cube and play around with it for a minute? He was like, okay, sure. So I got his Rubik's Cube and he allowed me to play with it for, 10, 15 minutes. And at the end of that 10, 15 minutes, I didn't get too far, but I thought I was doing pretty well. And I showed him my progress and I was like, hey, look, I solved the bottom side. And he just kind of scoffed at me and said, that's not it. That's wrong. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, it's right. And like, it was like this, I thought. And I thought that was kind of solved. Like I was on my way. I wasn't. So he had to take the Rubik's Cube, obviously, left class. And then when I got home after school, I begged my brother. I was like, please, 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 I need to get a Rubik's Cube because there's a kid at school who's like saying I can't solve it, but I know I can figure it out. And so after some hesitation, he was like, all right, I'll get you a Rubik's Cube. And so we go up to Walmart and I get my Rubik's Cube, I come home and I just start practicing, or trying to figure it out, I should say. And so hours pass, man, and I'm just sitting there in my room late that night trying to figure out how in the world do I solve this Rubik's Cube. It wasn't intuitive. I was struggling with just every aspect of it and getting really frustrated. So then it dawned on me, why don't I just Google search it? And so I Googled it and I found a website that explained how it worked. And it basically broke down the problem into multiple steps. And it was basically, it layered the problem. And I never really thought about it, how to solve it. I was just trying to brute force solve it. And so I stayed up late that night. And while it wasn't extremely intuitive to like follow the algorithms is what they were called, but it was just a bunch of sequences depending on the steps that you were on, I figured I'd give it a whirl and just keep trying and see if I could master these little algorithms. And so I stayed up late and eventually I did it. I solved the Rubik's Cube following these instructions, right? And so I go to class the next day and I see my classmate that, was not allowing me to flourish, I should say. And I basically showed him, I was like, hey, I got a Rubik's Cube too. And he was like, okay. And I just started solving it right in front of him and all of our classmates. And he wasn't really impressed. And then I solved it and everybody in class was like, wow, he did it. And super impressed with me, but him. So then he comes up to me and he's just like, did you Google it? And I just kind of smiled and didn't really answer the question. But of course I did. I'm not that brilliant. And so I was kind of surprised when he asked me that very direct question. So then I was like, did you? And he just laughed and he said, of course I did. Solved, by the way. And so I was kind of surprised because he made it seem like he achieved this thing by himself in complete isolation. But that's not true. That wasn't the case. It was really a lot of effort that I'm sure he put in to learn it. And learning how to solve a Rubik's Cube really taught me a lot. The first thing it taught me was in order to solve what seems like a complex problem, you got to break it down into pieces. And online, they have different methods of solving these things, but I just picked what, at the time when I was like 15, the easiest method, which was basically the layered approach. And that's the first thing. The second thing is you got to put in the work. I mean, it wasn't easy when I first tried to learn the algorithms and the sequences. It wasn't really intuitive to me, but I just kept pushing and kept pushing. And eventually I was able to like follow along with the logic that they were describing in the on the websites, and I was able to get it. And then Lastly, most importantly, Google it. I think oftentimes we try to brute force things instead of realizing that the legwork has been done in some regards, or there's just ways to do it that we can learn from, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so that was a huge lesson for me, because I ended up employing that technique like all throughout school, where if I didn't know something, I would ask my professors. If I didn't know something, I would ask my classmates. If I didn't know something, I would look for how to do it. And I think that turned out pretty good for me. But let me know what you guys think. Can you solve a Rubik's Cube? If you can, what's your best time? Mine is 43 seconds, but that's like 10 years expired maybe. But let me know in the comments. Thanks, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.